Hey everybody, David here. Today we're going to be going through some of the first videos for our online learning classes here at Sawmill Pottery. Today what I'm going to be doing is going through the coil building technique, the specifics of rolling out coils to get good even coils that are nice and round. I will then talk about using that to build a simple form. Later today we're going to be doing a live video on building with coils too, for those of you that are subscribed to our Zoom videos as well. What I'm going to do first is kind of go through the basic tools and space that you might need to coil build with, and then I'll go through the basics of rolling coils, and then coil building after that. What you're first going to need to do is have some clay here that I've got all wrapped up and ready to go. After that, what you might want to do is have a board to use, and you want space that's big enough to get a long length of coil and one that's like long enough this way to really get a good roll in your coil. Some other tools that you may want throughout this process is a piece of cardboard that you can then draw out the shape of the piece that you might want to make if you're building vertically, and then you can cut out that to be something like this, and this will be your outside form that you can build along. It's not something that you need, but it really is helpful to at least like give you a guideline for things to do. If you're going to build inside a form, having any kind of open bowl or shallow dish or anything like that would be great as well. If you're using anything that's plastic, glass, metal, you're going to want to line that with plastic. If you have ceramic molds or even wood or composite molds, you don't need plastic for them, but things like this that aren't porous, you definitely do. As far as cutting out your cardboard, you might want to do that with scissors, but you can also use just an X-Acto knife. For those of you that have drywall boards at home, if you're only going to be using one clay body, I prefer to have one side of my drywall used for clay, and then another side that you can use to cut with an X-Acto knife on. That way you never want to get the plaster into your clay, so if you switch those sides, that would work great. Having a dedicated one for cutting also works if you want another one that has one side for a white clay body and another side for a brown clay body. Some other tools that you might want to use when you're coil building, if you're building kind of in one go, you often don't need to scratch and score or do anything like that. But if you're going to come back to it later, the bottom part of your piece, or the piece that you were working on before, may have dried out a little bit, so you may want to scratch and score your next coil on. I'll talk about that at some point throughout the process. But whether or not you have a clay tool for scratching and scoring, fork works great for coil building, needle tools. I made this little scratching tool. It's just epoxy and some nails, and a little bit of water, of course, too. Some of the last things you might want to do, still that knife for other parts of coil building that you may want to do. Sometimes you have to dart your pieces to get the shape that you want. And lastly, I really like using ribs when I coil build, both a serrated rib and a metal rib. Now, if you're feeling like you don't have any of these tools, that's totally okay. We're going to be putting out another video, or maybe just next to this video already, of using household items to replace some of these tools if you don't have them. Of course, the clay ones are going to be best because they're made for working with clay, but there are some great ideas and other things probably hanging around your house that you can totally use in replacement for these kind of tools. Okay, so now that that's all out of the way, what I'm going to do is start to show you all how to get a nice round coil built and rolled out, some little tips and tricks to keep it nice and round, and what to do if your coil does begin to get flat. All right, here we go. So now you're ready to start building with coils. Well, at least start rolling out coils. To roll out coils, the only thing you're going to need to start with is a big hunk of clay and your hands. What I like to do is rip off a little bit of clay and then just in my hands kind of squish it to be kind of like a sausage or hot dog shape. One thing that I have found that people tend to do is that they make these kind of sausage shapes way too wide. What we really are trying to do when we're coil building, or at least coil rolling, is rolling the coil so it makes many, many rotations all the way across. That's what's going to keep it round. So you want to be really rolling from your finger to the heel of your hand. What happens when you have a piece that's way too thick, maybe like this, is it's going to make way fewer rotations than a skinnier piece, which means that it's probably going to go flat. Granted, there are some things that we can do when this does go flat to fix it, and I'll be talking about those in a minute, but you don't want to have to deal with that every time. So now that you've got your kind of coil squished out, you can already see how just doing those really light rotations has already started to round it up. What I like to do is just start in the center, roll a few times back and forth, and then slowly work my hands out to the outside. If it does start to get flat, like here on the ends, you can do a couple different things. One is you can pat it down so that the coil gets kind of squared again, so it's no longer rectangular, and then really rolling it nice and loosely in your hands to just get it back to round. The other thing that you can do if it gets flat, let me flatten it out here a little bit, is a lot of people like to twist it. So we're making kind of like a rope shape here. What that'll do is makes it so that in general the coil is much rounder, so that when you roll it, all of these little twists are going to start to flatten out to make a nice round coil again. Whatever the thickness of your coil is going to be the thickness that your piece is. So whether or not you want to roll out really thick pieces for if you're making a really big piece, or if you want to roll out very thin ones for more delicate pieces, that's totally up to you. What I would recommend though is if you are going to roll out a bunch of coils at a time, which I like to do, that way I don't have to stop every time I add a coil, is have a piece of plastic that you're going to put your coils in. That's something I forgot, but I think y'all know what it is. Oh, here, I can use this one. So just put your coils in that plastic and keep them wrapped up. So when I'm really making lots of coil pieces, I'll roll out a bunch of sausages first, or squish them out. So I've got them here. And these coils don't need to be super long. I'll show ways of putting them together. And then again, really rolling from the heel of your hand all the way to your fingers and back and forth. That's what's going to keep it round. If it's easier for you, you can do with one hand and just do shorter coils working back and forth. Or start right in the center and work your hands out. Although this, again, looks really, really easy, just like when you see people throwing the wheel after they have lots of experience, it does take some time to get the kind of rhythm to coil rolling. So don't be frustrated if at first your coils aren't coming out very round. You'll get it in time. So there, you can kind of see I was rolling with just the heel of my hand and pushing a little too hard, so my coil has gotten flat again, much wider than this way. So then, pat it down, or twist it, or both. Really roll it, fingers to your heel of your hand, get it back into round, and then you can continue rolling. I'm trying to keep these coils relatively small. I'm not going to be making a very big piece, but if you wanted to do a longer coil here to make a bigger piece, that's okay. It's just trying to keep that same rhythm and really rolling as much as you can, heels of your hands all the way to your fingers. Sometimes you may find that one hand pushes harder than the other hand, so it's okay to flip your coil over if you need to, and continue rolling the other way to make a nice even coil. Okay, so now I've got a few coils at least to start with, and I'm going to talk about how to put them together here next. If you have any questions, feel free to give us a shout or save those questions for our Zoom live video if you are subscribed to that. That is always going to be the best way to get the most information. All right, now to putting them together. So when you're first building with coils, you need to create a base for your pieces. What I like to do is take a little ball of clay and make a little pinch pot out of it. So I'm just pushing my thumb down in the center and turning. I'm not trying to do this all at once. I'm trying to just do it little by little and trying to keep it as round as possible for as long as I can. This is going to be the base of our piece. Some people like to use just a flat slab, and that's totally cool. What I like about this pinch pot, though, even if it's not very pretty, is that when we flip it over, it's pretty much a foot. So it doesn't rock at all, right? Sometimes a flat piece, if it's not perfectly or tapped in at all at the bottom, it will tend, as it dries, to belly out a little bit, and it might rock. This, I have very infrequently seen them rock in the end. It does have some other cons to it, in that you do have to really be careful that you're putting your first coil on here. A lot of times we like to get out too wide too quickly, and then you get like 3 or 4 coils added onto this, so you've got a really wide foot. You don't need that. You really are just putting them on right at this corner out here. Other than that, though, I really like this pinch pot way. So, when you first are adding a coil, there's a few different ways to do that. One is you can just put your coil down and wrap it around, and then just keep building on the top here. This is definitely going to be the quickest way, and I'll show you how you can add it on more thoroughly. So like, if I'm going to build this way, I hold my coil with my right hand, and then with my left hand, as I put this coil in, I blend it down a little bit with my left hand. If you do have a banding wheel or any kind of turntable at home, that's great for coil building. As some of you might not, I'm going to try to do it without it, and you can see it totally works. You just have to turn your piece a little more frequently. So this has kind of gotten put on there, at least smushed together a bit. What then I really like to do, and you can do a few coils at a time, I wouldn't get more than 3 or 4 inches though, is that I then take my finger and really blend that clay down. As you can tell, we're not scratching and scoring because our clay is wet enough that if we really blend it, it should stay together. That being said, scratching and scoring is always going to hold things together better than simply blending. So if you want to do that, that's totally great. So then I've gotten the outside or the inside blended. Then I'm going to move to the outside. With a piece this small that I can handle without warping it, I'll pick it up and really blend here. As we get taller, we may want to just leave it flat and not handle it so much for fear of warping it. So I both will blend back and forth, trying to keep that piece pretty consistent and just really moving that clay from one coil into the next. So I'm really kind of pushing part of that coil down. What I'm not doing is just kind of folding that clay over, really blending, moving that clay from this coil all the way down for as much as I can. And then I'll go back. Like many hand building techniques, things aren't going to look pretty at first. What they are going to be doing though, oops, phone's ringing, sorry everyone. Give me a second, I'll get that, and then I'll get back to coil building. All right, back at it. So as I was saying, like most hand building techniques, things are gonna look a little rough at first, and over time you're gonna be able to make them look better and better and better. With clay, you can't make them look perfect at all. As many of you know, it's all about timing. That right now, when the clay is really wet, it's about getting your general shape. Then as it dries, you can start to add or at least create more detail smooth it out, all of those things. You can kind of see this is super rough. That's totally cool. Not worried about it at all. All right. So that's one way to do it, is to build coils as you go. When I attach my coil next, what I like to do is pinch one of my coils vertically, so it's going up and down. Take my next coil here, and pinch that one too. So then you can put these two little mouths together, and it ends up being like a snake biting its tail. Blend those together so it makes one kind of seamless coil, and you keep working from there. What I'm going to do with this one is just pinch it off here to make kind of a level round here, so that I can show you some other ways to build with coils. I'm still going to blend this. Really well, both on the inside and the outside. Again, not too worried about it being too rough. Okay. So this coil might end up being a little too short now that I've pinched off. Let me grab another. So another way that people like to build with coils, and this way is nice to be able to keep it round, I would say, is that you're going to build one coil at a time. So you put your coil on top, get kind of an idea of where the overlap of your coil is going to be, and then do that same pinching that I just talked about. Put those two edges together, blend them so much so that you can't really see your overlap, and then put it right on top. When you're coil building, if you put your coil right vertically on top of the last one, generally what's going to happen is it's going to get just a little bit wider, which is great because usually you want to get a little bit wider, and that's where this one is. If you want to make it so your piece really comes in, then really put that coil on the inside. If you want to do the opposite and really have it go out, really put that on the outside. As many of us know, clay doesn't have any or very low horizontal strength, as I like to say, so it doesn't like to come out this way too fast without also coming up vertically. So you want to be really careful of that. If you do need to build out horizontally, sometimes it's better to flip your piece over and build that way and let it dry, or just work really slowly, one coil at a time, and let that get to like a soft leather hard before you put the next coil on, or else it's really going to slump down. So now that I have this coil right on top, I'm going to go around and blend. Again, you don't need to blend every coil as you go, but I wouldn't do more than 3, maybe 4 coils worth before I blend. Now, some of you might be thinking or asking, what about if I like the way the coils look on the outside? And you can totally leave the coil design on the outside if you want. What a lot of people will do if they do that is scratch and score, just very carefully so that they're not getting out to that outside edge. Or you can just be really, really conscious of blending extra on the inside if you want your coil design to stay on that outside. And I'll show that in a second too. Let's see. So I'm going to put another coil on, and then I'm going to talk about really smoothing out the surface, and then I'll show that other way of adding coils if you want to keep that design. So I've now got these little pieces, but they fit together to make a nice go around there. So I'm going to do that same pinching on all of these and all of these. Snake biting its own tail. Blend all that together. I like to blend these together first. That way when I go to blend my coil into the rest of my piece, that it blends pretty evenly and I'm not having big chunks and one side isn't getting above the other. If that is happening, like I did early on with this little piece here, you can just take a small section of coil and fill in where it's getting lower than the rest. Blend that and then work on your next coil. So if you're finding, if you have made one of these cardboard forms that we talked about earlier to use on the outside of your shape, and you find that your coils are starting to get out of whack of that shape and you want to bring them back in, there's a few different ways to do that. One, if you need to get wider, you can really pinch the coils, because pinching is going to make these thinner. It's also going to make it wider, because if they get thinner, they have to get wider. So if you need to get it wider, if you just go around and pinch this piece out, it's going to get wider on you. But you can already see how much wider that gets so quickly. The other thing that you can do, if you need to come back in, is you don't want to just bend it in, because if you bend it in, somewhere it has to go out. So whenever you bend in, you also compress. So I'm going to push the clay together and blend in. And that's going to really bring my piece in. I might get these little kind of folds in it, and that's okay, because of the way we're building, we can go back and just blend all of that stuff together too. So you can kind of see I've started to even bring this in a ton here at the top, especially compared to how wide it was a second ago. And that's really what you will be doing to get that shape. Okay, cool. And now for blending and cleaning up. If I do want a smooth surface, with the starting of this so that I can really get the bottom, I'll flip this over and work. Because this is a nice supportive surface, still I'll be able to do it. As we get taller with our pieces, I'll find that I can just work normally. What I first like to do is use a serrated rib. Again, if you don't have a serrated rib, look at our video about using household tools and we'll show you some alternatives to using this. But I just like to scrape all of this surface up. What's really great about this is the areas that are higher, it'll take clay away from. And then what you can do is areas that are lower, it'll show. You can kind of see that there's scratch marks all the way around except for in this little spot. So that means it's lower. So I can kind of spackle in a little clay from the higher areas and add that in there. And what I'm really trying to do is get an even surface all the way around. My favorite serrated ribs are the flexible steel ones, the spring steel. This one's pretty solid. I can't bend it really, so I can't bend it around my shape. So I really have to go little by little. Then I'll go back with my other flexible steel rib. Again, we've got alternatives for you in that household items video if you don't have any of these ribs at home. That being said, they're easy to come across, and I'm sure pottery suppliers would be happy for your business. They aren't very expensive. I found them for less than $1. Right, and so you can kind of see how much more smooth that surface is already. Again, we're not looking for it to be perfect at this point. Just getting it so it's a lot smoother and kind of just nicer looking at this point is all we're looking for. We'll continue to be going back and really getting that nice and perfect as the piece dries. Okay, so the last little thing I wanted to show you is if you wanted to leave your coil texture on the outside. Get rid of all these scraps. So you can just leave your round coil right on the top and just blend the outside. But you can also do designs if you want. So I'm just going to roll a few of these coils out a little bit skinnier. Just in my hand. There are some amazing coil builders that can just start with a big chunk of clay in their hands and just like roll out these beautiful even coils straight down from their hands. Honestly, I have tried to perfect that technique for a period of time, and I'm not there yet. But if I ever do get there, you'll be the first to know. So then I'm just going to take these little coils I made and just make little kind of rollies, little Swiss rolls. Then what I like to do to make sure these stay together is blend on one side all of these together there. If some of you are having trouble with using your fingers to blend, or if you have long fingernails, well, sometimes long fingernails will help a lot. Where you're having some trouble, one of these clay modeling tools works great. This edge is really shaped much like your thumb so that it can do some of the same things, but it's much sharper, so it will very easily move some of that clay around. Again, some of you might not have one of these tools, and so often just a spoon works great too, because if you compare that to your thumb or that to that tool, the end of a spoon is really similar, so that will do a very similar job. Granted, it's not as easy to hold because it's made for putting things in, not blending, but it works. You can do these same tools when blending kind of the inside of your pots as well. All right, so I've got those blended. And then I can just stack these up on the surface here. And I'm gonna leave the design of these guys all the way around. So obviously I don't have enough to kind of complete this circle, but I'm sure you all can infer from here. All right, cool. So now I need to blend some of this clay down. And I can do that with one of these tools, especially right at the bottom. It's nice to get those attached there with a tool or your finger. Get that in there. And sometimes even like the two little doohickeys right next to each other. If you were doing this, you could do any kind of designs. These swirls are just kind of the first thing that always comes to mind for me. You could do it with a regular coil, anything like that. But then I like to go in, and you can, if you ever find that your piece has a thin spot, just take little bits of clay, that's way bigger than we actually need, little bits of clay, and kind of fill in those little spots. This will make your piece a little bit thicker, but it'll also make it so it stays together better. Then really blend this stuff there. Again, it is always safest to scratch and score. I've been coil building for some time, have made some pretty big projects, and so I trust my blending technique. If you don't trust your blending technique at this point, or you really want to be sure everything stays together, don't be afraid to scratch and score. The last thing I'm going to kind of be showing, or one of the last things, is scratching and scoring. If you were to stop, building one of these pieces for a little while and then come back to it. But I will also talk about how to make it so you don't see your scratching marks on the outside. So with that, you can kind of see that I've made these little coil guys that are all the way around. And so from there, if I want to, I can add in other designs, like there can be just little dots in between the tops here. Oops. That I would blend down and in. Then a coil over the top that I could blend or leave to really kind of make some sort of design here. Again, in our Zoom video, we're going to be working with putting pieces inside of forms to make designs with the coils. If you are subscribed, you can do that, and we'll talk more about making designs there. For this, I just want to talk about how to build with coils. So we'll put that to the side. Pull out a pot I was working on earlier. So this is one of the pieces that I've been making to kind of really mimic this form here that we have. Kind of see I've started to smooth it out already. It's not perfectly smooth, but it's pretty smooth. And because it's been sitting a little while, although I probably could get away with just blending a coil right into the top, it probably is safer if you've left your piece for a little while to scratch and score your first coil on. So whenever you scratch and score, the idea is that you're building up slip on the surface. So I'm gonna wet my room a little bit. I'm gonna take my scratching tool. I can use my clay one. I can use this little one that I made, just epoxy and some nails. Or if you like, fork works great too. You don't need to go super deep, but the idea is that you're blending your water into your clay to make a slip on the surface. And what the scratching is doing is blending that in and creating a lot of surface area. What the water is doing is making it really gooey. So do that, blend. As someone who likes to say he's a hand builder at heart, I really like to overdo the scratching and scoring. I never want a piece that's going to come back in the end and have cracks in it just because I wasn't patient enough to scratch and score. I'm lazy enough in some of my other parts of my life. I don't need to be here too. I really get everywhere. You don't really want to see any flat areas. You want this to look gooey. And so then what I would do is do the same thing to anywhere on my coil that's going to get added. So adding, whoops, move that out of the way for a second, adding water everywhere across here, and then I'll scratch and score. So if you wanted to make it so that you were scratching and scoring your coil, but you want to leave that coil design, rather than really getting after it, which, like, you know, if I were to just really get after it here, like this, blending is going to come all the way up the edges. And I can go back and smooth that out afterwards. But if I wanted to make my coil design stay there, what I can do is I just need to scratch and score the very edge where my two pieces are going to meet together. And I'm really thinking blending, right? I'm blending this clay together with the water to make slip. That slip, as it dries, it's going to dry as one part rather than two. All right. So then I'm going to take this coil, put it right on top, wrap it all the way around here, making sure that that slip side stays down. Snake biting its own tail. Blend that in so it's nice and pretty. Put my coil on there and really wiggle it back and forth. What you should feel whenever you are attached two pieces and scratch and square them together is that the piece will slide, 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 and then catch. And you should really feel that piece kind of catch. That means there it slides a lot. As I push down and wiggle it, you really will feel like catch, and that means it's going to be pretty attached. And then I can go through and blend that inside there, and you can kind of see how this would keep. So when I put on my next coil, I would just blend or scratch and score right at that top edge. Nice when they're round because you have a nice high point of attachment, and do the same thing to the other. If you get it so that you get some edges here, you can take a tool like this and go in there and really compress it. Or honestly, one of my favorite tools for that sort of thing is just like a pencil. Okay, getting a little distracted with actually making this piece. If y'all have any other questions about coil building, please let us know or save them for the live Zoom video on coil building inside a form. We may revisit coil building vertical pieces as a Zoom live video later, with a more specific piece or a much larger piece. So stay tuned. Hope you all enjoyed it and have a great day. Bye.